Okay, so we're on. Thank you for coming. And that conversation that we've been planning for a long time, and unfortunately, COVID in April kind of spoiled our plans. I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Dr. Gorshkov, Dr. Dosha Gorshkov. I'm Assistant Director for Pride and Women's Center, and we are putting together this panel because what I believe people sometimes lack the information about the very serious events happening across the board and across the globe, and even in some states of the United States. So it's human trafficking. I call it personally inhuman because to me it's definitely inhuman rather than human. And personally, I know the story from the Russian-speaking community. One of the gay old person who was charged with the human trafficking a couple years ago, and it was a story in New York Times. He and his wife then took away people's passport, they tricked them into the United States, and after that they would literally sell them. That human trafficking, it's not only what we imagine people from the poor areas of life, that people could be misguided and misled. That's why we put together that panel, and we're going to talk about different aspects of human trafficking and human trafficking today with our brilliant experts. I'm going to just introduce each of you. I have some schedule. Maisie put together the order you would like to talk. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just read your bios right away, and after that give the floor if it's okay with you. So today we have 3 panelists, and I'm literally grateful that you could find the time to be with us. So the first is Brenda Lutz. Do not mind me because sometimes I mess up the names. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So who is representing Living in Liberty, and she's going to talk about trafficking in general as an overview. And Brenda is a local resident and has been involved in raising awareness to human trafficking for several years. She's a volunteer ambassador of Hope for Shared Hope International and part of the awareness and prevention team with Living in Liberty. Living in Liberty is a local Pittsburgh organization that rescues and restores trafficked victims. They operate at 2 homes in the Pittsburgh area for survivors and 2 repurposed stores to help fund the care that is needed to restore these women. That's our first speaker who will speak later on. The next speaker is Kaeleen Martin, who represents The Voice, our partner organization from, I learned that it's 2 branches in Butler and the Cranberry. You're from Cranberry, I believe, right? Okay, so she's going to talk about science of trafficking that focus on systematic issues rather than physical characteristics. And Kaeleen, before her time at Voice, her journey stemmed from her interest in researching the impacts and extent of human trafficking, as well as volunteering for human trafficking organizations and advocating for victims' rights. This has spanned over a decade and has led to the creation of a specific human trafficking training, which Kaeleen implements as part of the Voice mandatory advocate training. Kaeleen received her bachelor's degree in social work from Slippery Rock University, shout out to SRU. Her passion for victim service led her to internship at Voice at the beginning of 2017, where she quickly grew into her roles as a Voice prevention education advocate. Today, she provides prevention and educational programming across Butler County. Topic is gender violence, domestic violence, one-on-one, human trafficking, and internet safety. And last but not least, Joseph Sweeney, the Asservo Project, who is going to talk to us about digital and cyber characteristics of trafficking. So Joe is a Pittsburgh native, growing up in the Hayesville section of the city. His 25 years of service includes service as a corrections officer at the Allegheny County Jail, a police officer at the City of Pittsburgh Police Department. Yes, somebody's just not, I guess, muted. If you could mute yourself, because that I cannot hear myself. So he's been a police officer at the City of Pittsburgh Police Department, assigned to the SWAT bomb squad unit, an explosive specialist at the US Department of Homeland Security, and is currently working as a government contractor at the US Department of State, deploying overseas, working with nations allied with the United States in the anti-terrorism assistance program. He is graduate of the FBI Hazardous Device School, Weapons of Mass Destruction, and Large Vehicle Post-Blast Schools, as well as Underwater Explosive Recovery and Physical Security Schools. He was the former international director for the International Association of Bomb Technicians and Investigators, and currently sits on the board of trustees. He is a member in good standing with the National Tactical Officer Association, and he volunteers for his church's college and career ministry and men's ministry. Joe was exposed to the epidemic of human trafficking a little over a year ago. Once he heard of the enormous problems and the number of victims involved, he felt there had to be something done to fight this horrific situation affecting our children and young adults. He is the founder and CEO of the Asservo Project, an organization which is committed to fight the human trafficking and child exploitation epidemic and rescuing the victims caught in this horrific criminal industry. So without further ado, I'm giving up the floor to Brenda.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you, as I said before, for having us and doing this very important Zoom meeting. So what I hope to do is educate you a little bit more about what human trafficking really is. Human trafficking is the buying, selling, and owning of another human being. In short, it is modern day slavery. There's more slavery in our world today than there's ever been at any point in history. Matter of fact, as we are all gathered here tonight, there are more slaves. There's more people trapped as slaves than there were in the 400 years combined that folks were stolen out of Africa and sold into slavery around our world. When I started learning these statistics, it literally blew my mind. I thought, this can't be right. This can't be true. And I began educating myself. I dug in and said, we've got to bring light to this. Now, I've worked with children or with teens for over 25 years on a volunteer basis. When I started learning about the industry and how it works, I knew that our kids here in the United States, anyway, they're the ones on the front line. So my goal in getting into human trafficking was definitely from an education point and from a standpoint of preventing it from happening. So what is the big deal about this? You need to know that last year, human trafficking was a $150 billion industry. $100 billion of that came from the sex slave industry. That is more than Microsoft, McDonald's, and Starbucks combined. It is a massive industry. So as you learn about the different forms of slavery. So there are, there's the slavery that we all think of, like forced labor slavery. Does that still happen in the United States? It does. It's not as frequent as other places. It happens a lot of times right under our noses because we're not educated to see it. But what I'm primarily going to focus on this afternoon is DMST, domestic minor sex trafficking. Domestic meaning the United States, minor under the age of 18 in the sex trafficking industry. Shared Hope International, that was started in 1998 by then Congresswoman Linda Smith. And when she learned about the plight of the sex slave industry of children around our world, she knew she needed to do something. So they formed Shared Hope International. However, a few years into it, they realized, wait a second, this is happening here on American soil to American children. So Shared Hope's really credited with a lot of the laws that have been passed or in the works of the education part of it, right down to terminology that we use. So it's come a long way, but we've got a long way to go, as you'll see. When you're talking about a minor trapped in the sex slave industry, so the average age of an American child in that industry is the average age is 13 years old. That's boys and girls both. Unfortunately, we're seeing that age come down as the demand for younger and younger children is on the rise. We see a lot more girls than we do boys, but Shared Hope estimates that anywhere between 18 and 40% are boys. We're just not seeing them. It's much more difficult for a boy to come forward even than it is for a girl. You have to understand too that 85% of these kids in the United States are American citizens. It's a myth that they're brought in from other countries. Can that happen? It can, but it's a very small percentage. Simply because we've made it so easy in this country to get our children, there's no need for them to go outside of the United States. 99% of the buyers in the sex industry are men. Just a fact. There's no exact picture of that guy. It can be that creepy guy down the street that you think, oh, It can really literally be anybody from the age of 18 to 80. And from any socioeconomic background, any religious background, it's across the board. We do see a large percentage of them seem to be white, married, and with children. We all hear about, protecting our children in stranger danger. And we see the stories and read about them at, Walmart's parking lot or in Target. Can it happen? It can. But please hear me on this. That comprises about 3% of these kids. 3%. The other 97% of these kids stuck in this have some sort of relationship with their trafficker. It's called the grooming process, and they're excellent at it. You have to remember how much money we're talking about here. So it can be somebody as close to them as a family member selling them. I've really seen and Joe might attest to this too, or Kaeleen, like we've had a rise more recently, I think, in family members selling. They're either their children or siblings or niece, nephew, grandchildren, whatever. But it can also be as simple as just somebody saying to them, "You're beautiful," or "I love you," or "I'll give you a meal." When it comes to a minor and sex, minors cannot consent to sex. So and it doesn't have to be a money transaction. It can be food, it can be drugs, it can be a place to sleep at night. I actually know quite a number of kids that do the couch surfing. They really don't have a home to stay in. And so if an adult buys a minor a meal, and then in exchange wants some sexual favor, that is minor sex trafficking, and that is federal, that's breaking a federal law. The kids don't even realize what's going on most times. It is, if they are out on the street, a runaway, they are at least approached, if not already trafficked, within the first 48 hours of being on that street. The trafficker just know right where to find them and how to get them and what to do to get them involved. When you look at the statistics of who this affects when we're talking about our kids, are there some that are more at risk? Absolutely. The amount of kids that are missing out of our foster care system is staggering. We quite honestly don't have any idea how many kids are missing, and they don't have a voice in there for them saying, "Man, we need to find these kids." We have some, but nothing like what we need. It is a supply and demand industry. If there was no demand, there would be no supply, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. There is a direct correlation between pornography and the sex industry, and the demand for these kids. We're seeing the rise go hand in hand up. There's a direct correlation to it. Pornography works just like any other drug works. Just like cocaine works in the brain and other drugs, you get a little bit and then you need a little more to get high, and a little more and a little more. So you have somebody that thinks, "Oh, I'm not hurting anything. I'm just looking at something on my screen." And before you know it, there's a slippery slope and they're buying a kid for sex. The pornography industry also uses the pornography to train the children. So the kids know exactly what to say, when to say, and how to say it. And let me tell you, they are met with more than brutal consequences if they do not comply. The kids are very often controlled with drugs or physical abuse, food, you name it. There's no end to what they do and the tactics that the traffickers will go to or use to control the kids and keep their supply coming in, keep their money coming in. What do the traffickers look like? Well, the traffickers really can look like anybody too. There's one thing I always say about human trafficking. It does not discriminate. If you want an industry that does not discriminate, that's human trafficking for you. It doesn't care what your hopes are, your dreams are, what age you are, what your skin color is, or your religious beliefs. It doesn't care how much money you have or don't have. If it can exploit you, it is going to, period. So the traffickers can look from, that wide range of the guy that you think of on the street, the pimp. And I don't like the word. I don't like our terminology. In our world, we've made the word pimp like something cool, pimping this out. What a pimp is a brutal slave owner, period. That's all they are. And we need to change those terminologies and look at what this really is. They're not just a prostitute. They're not just a kid that wants to have fun. This is a 14-year-old kid. You really think they want to have sex with a 50-year-old man? Because they don't. When we rescue a child out, or a woman out, or a boy, a man out, there's so many layers of trauma that they've gone through, and that's where people like The Voice come in and other organizations come in to help them. As you said in the beginning, I work with Living in Liberty, and they're a great organization, and they have 2 rescue restore homes that women that are rescued out that they can go to and actually learn to build a life, because many times they've been trafficked from a very young age. So although we're talking about children, once they hit 18, it doesn't mean that their life just gets better. This has been their life for many, many years. So where you or I might have been going to school and learning skills, they have not had any of those opportunities. So people like, or organizations, and there's a lot of them, there's a lot of good organizations in our area to get involved with and to help out in whatever aspect you want to get involved with. But a lot of the traffickers you have to be aware too. They may look like, yes, like that pimp. They may be, they can be a woman. We see a large percentage of women that are traffickers. Quite often when a woman is rescued out of it, she's not only a human trafficking victim, but she's also a trafficker. They are made to recruit more. That is part of their job. To do that. So a lot of times we see the boyfriend, that's probably the most popular, where the boyfriend comes in, and when I talk to students all the time, I say, girls, listen to me. If he's Mr. Wonderful, but he wants you to just do this little favor so he can get some booze or get his car fixed or something, no, he is a trafficker. That's what he is doing. He is selling you to get what he wants. Oftentimes human trafficking is like a massive iceberg that we're only seeing that little crust on the top. You know, we might see what we think is a prostitute or is a pimp. That's that little tiny crust on the top. That the vast majority of it is underneath the surface. That's why things like these are so important. We need to peel that back so that we are educated in what it looks like, and so that we know what steps to take, so we can put pressure on our government and legislators. So when laws need to be passed, that we can work together to get those things passed. A couple of books that I want to recommend is, the first one is called Societal Shift. It was written by Opal Singleton, and she started millionkids.org. It is a read that every parent, grandparent should read. It talks a lot about the internet and how that's working and how they're trafficking the kids literally right out of their bedrooms. And, you know, so often we think we're good parents and we buy them, you know, we get them their iPhones and we want them to be popular and have the latest thing. And you just let your 10-year-old go to bed with their iPhone and just invited every pedophile in the world into their bedroom with them without ever realizing it. And you think that you educate the kids saying, well, don't do this and don't look at that. You have to realize they're against professionals. These guys will work in packs just like a wolf. They connect with their own fetish, and they will literally work in packs with whatever, maybe a game that the kids are playing online or in chat rooms, those kinds of things. So please, please educate yourself. The other book I highly recommend is called Renting Lacey. It was written by Linda Smith, who started Shared Hope International. Really gives a good view of what some of these kids' lives are like and what it's like within the industry. One quick thing I wanted to tell you, the New York Times came out with a report last September or October, and it was the child sexual abuse imagery online. So in 2014, they said they had about 1 million child sexual abuse imageries online. 4 years later, 2018, 45 million. 1 million to 45 million in 4 years' times. Folks, this has exploded. Now, part of that is because folks like the Asservo Project and other ones have gotten better at, finding these guys, but this literally has exploded, and we need to be on top of it. So, I'm available. The best way usually to get a hold of me is via Facebook. And if I can help in any way or send you in a direction with the organizations that I, volunteer with and work with, I'm more than happy to help. So thank you for your time. And I was told I had 15 minutes, so I'm a minute. You get an extra minute, Kaeleen.
No, you're good. Thank you, Brenda. So we're gonna ask panelists after the whole panel when they present their theses, so we can ask away via chat or by unmuting yourself. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And next, I would like to invite Kaeleen. So Kaeleen, the floor is yours.
Ooh, I remember to unmute myself. Look at me go. Hi, everybody. My name's Kaeleen, and I do work for Voice here in Butler County. If you haven't heard of us, it stands for Victim Outreach Intervention Center. And like during the introduction, we serve victims of all forms of violence. So it could be domestic violence, sexual assault, or victims of other violent crimes. So please, if you need somebody to talk to, or you're just looking for some place to start when you've had this type of trauma, give us a call. We'll try to meet you where you are and go with the process with you. I see some of our legal advocates on here. Hi guys. I'm just really excited that they're here because we do a lot in the legal system, and we're always here to help people through that process as well. Whether it's students, yeah, we're here. So I chose to talk about some signs of human trafficking, but I really wanted to stay away from the physical sometimes characteristics that people talk about, because lately, as I saw some of these physical characteristics of, sometimes somebody with maybe it was dirty hair or like a disheveled appearance type thing, I kept picturing myself at an airport, and I was like, oh, well, that's just not going to be, somebody always. And then there was a lot of things about, like, if you see a small child with an older person, like, I've been traveling with my grandparents, since I was 5. Like, did people ever think, you know what I mean? So I tried to kind of stay away from some of those signs. Obviously, a physical sign, if somebody has, like, you can tell, like, bruises around their wrist type things like that, we're looking at maybe a more serious thing, but not just like a disheveled person, because you just never truly know, like, somebody's having a bad day. So one of the big things, and I like that Brenda, we talked about, yes, are some people more vulnerable, and that's really true, and that's kind of what I wanted to focus on. Some of the most vulnerable populations that we talk about are this runaway youth, and a lot of times that also is affecting the LGBTQ plus community. We see a lot of people within this community, imagine if you get kicked out of your house because of that, and somebody comes to you and they're like, I have food, I have a cell phone, I have a warm bed for you. Like, heck yeah, I'm gonna go right with that person because I'm hungry and I want a warm place to stay. And whereas that could be a trafficker. So it's really looking at these issues in a community as a whole. Is there poverty? Is poverty a really big thing in a certain community? I mean, if I am really desperate for something to eat or to feed my kids, like, I'm going to do, like, if somebody's offering to help me in any way, shape, or form, what are you gonna do? We're gonna try to make it work, whatever you gotta do. So areas of poverty, areas with, like I said, a lot of low income, impoverished areas. We have, individuals, unfortunately, it's always, it really affects me. Individuals with disabilities are a huge vulnerable population when it comes to sexual assault and trafficking as well, and being taken advantage of. And I think it's like one of my soft spots. So, if we have, say, a home, like they're sometimes called adult daycare centers type things, like what's happening at those places type things, it's areas. I'm not saying that if there's an adult daycare center, trafficking is happening at all. I'm just pointing out that, it is unfortunately a vulnerable population. And a big thing that has been coming out more and more and more is drugs and human trafficking overlapping and intersecting very often. So really, if a community has, say, a big influx of drugs, there's a huge chance that there's also trafficking happening, because even as Brenda was saying, that's a huge tactic that traffickers use to get a person to stay with them or to get them to do what you want them to do. Like, if I'm providing your drug and I'm telling you, you have to make $500 before I'm going to give you your drug, you're going to start going to withdrawal, and you're going to do whatever you can, and you're going to make that money for me, right? So I just bring those up as opposed to, like I said, just the general physical aspects. Also, somebody seems really timid. It's not always, that comes up as a sign all the time, and that could just be a really shy person. But say this really timid person is with somebody or in a surrounding where like they have no say, like somebody's always speaking for them, that kind of thing. Maybe they're talking down to them, you know, say I'm trying to get a word out, but another person's constantly talking over to me and you're trying to ask questions. I always want to bring that up. Maybe, you know, somebody has a complete lack of control over any of their money. Like say it could even be an employee and you just notice, or a student, somebody's always talking about giving somebody else all of their money. Again, that could be, again, a potential like sign away from the physical. Really, and a big one, like if somebody doesn't have access to their documents, like say you're, even if you're at a job, like you're on a job application and somebody's like, oh, well, I don't have my passport, I don't have my driver's license, like that's kept from me, that can always be somewhat of a sign. So my big things was, you know, sorry, I'm like, I just got lost. I have so many notes and I'm like picking out what I want to do the best. My big things were the community as a whole, like, and like Brenda said too, trafficking doesn't discriminate. I mean, you might think in like, I mean, I'm working in Cranberry Township and shout out to all Cranberry Knights and everything like that, but I have a really hard time convincing people here that it's happening. There's just kind of like this, I guess, perspective that, you know, certain communities it can't happen, especially I mentioned a lot of times in impoverished areas it's more likely to happen and more vulnerable, but it's happening everywhere. It really doesn't matter, and I really like that Brenda said trafficking doesn't discriminate, because it's really, really true. I mean, kids have access to online. Even that, when it comes to this whole environment thing and things that surround somebody, a kid with a lot of access to tech, which I know Joe's going to talk about, that alone could, I don't want to say a sign, but you know, I always used to be so mad at my mom for not letting me have a computer in my room. And now I'm like, oh, maybe Twyla had a point, like with not letting me, or like putting the phone away after like 8 p.m. or so. So yeah, just like keeping an eye on knowing kind of like the behaviors of your friends, people that are close to you, people, again, and in the college world, I thought about all the times, like I had no money at times. And I was just like, somebody would be like, oh, hot food, great. You see those signs sometimes where it's like work for $17 an hour. I once creepily went to one of those places and it was like an abandoned warehouse because I was truly curious about what it was. So please, like if you're ever in a really bad spot, reach out, like community resources. We'll try to meet you where you're at. So yeah, that was my, oh my gosh, I have more time, you guys. I was trying to like make this super quick and to the point, but I really, like I said, I think I'm about done. Oh, I have a list of questions. Even like if you are like, whether you're an employer, your students, or like just sort of like assessment questions. And I always want to credit, I got this from the A21 campaign. They have this whole curriculum. It's called Bodies Are Not Commodities. And A21 is international with their programming and their work. So some like questions to even ask potential victims. And we've actually turned this into even a screening tool here at Voice is what type of work do you do? Because not everything, you know, like obviously we know that sex work is work. So not all, like, you know what I mean? Not all sex work is somebody being trafficked. So we always want to go into like more depth with people, just because I don't, like I said, I don't want people to think like it's all trafficking. Are you getting paid to do your job? That's a really big thing that we try to ask people. You're not seeing money for the services, whatever it is that you're doing. Like, do you see the payment? Can you come and go as you please? Like if you're noticing somebody kind of like always asking for permission, always asking for permission, always like very hesitant to where they're going, like somebody seems very controlling. Are you supervised when you're in a public place is something I've asked people. Like, can you do something without like someone else's permission? And a big thing too, somebody whose family's been threatened. Traffickers love to use this thing that we call coercion, which is basically making you feel like you have no option except to do what it is they're telling you to do. So for example, they could, you know, be threatening your family. So if somebody ever comes to you and is like, I had, you know, this happen, somebody's threatening, or, you know, if somebody's threatening you in that way, there could really be some sort of underlying thing happening. I really like that Brenda pointed out too, victims, it's just a myth that like a victim will just run up to you. That used to be a sign of trafficking, is a victim coming to you and telling you that they're, but like, you don't always know. Victims of trafficking don't always know they're being trafficked. And just like victims of domestic violence and survivors of violence don't always realize that what has happened to them is abusive. you know, sometimes victims of trafficking are like, this just is. So we never want to like, with that with somebody like, oh, you're a trafficking victim, like that could be traumatizing in itself. So just, you know, having this basic knowledge and looking out for these signs, and really the communities, maybe oppressions that are about a group of people where, you know, like I said, somebody who is desperate and wants to eat or is living in poverty, they're going to do whatever it is that they can to make ends meet. So just really kind of keep that in mind. I'm not saying like we're going to go into all of, say, the impoverished areas or neighborhoods and be like, who here is being trafficked? No, I'm just saying like to give us an awareness and to give us like some sort of starting point that isn't just, you know, a person who's disheveled or maybe hasn't washed their hair in a couple of days. So that's what I got. I guess we'll turn it over to Joe. Thanks.
Thank you, Kaeleen. Joe, you're next.
Well, thank you, guys. Hey, pleasure for the invite here as well. I don't think I'll take 15 minutes. Usually I think all of us has in this time of Zoom and stuff, question and answers are really where we get to the meat of the problem, right? And trying to understand where people are. Just a quick background of the Asservo Project. We started 3 years ago in 2017. And what happened was, it was a discussion I had with one of my colleagues while overseas working about kidnapped American children, and was asked to help rescue those kids. So it struck my interest from the standpoint of, wow, I didn't know there were that many, but apparently there was. So we had a conversation, and I started to do research simply on missing American children, kidnapped American kids. And what I found, you know, after currently 27 years in law enforcement and federal government service, I had no idea the criminal enterprise that exists in human trafficking and child exploitation. And it was somewhat embarrassing to me. You know, I've been a lot of places and I've witnessed labor trafficking. So I started to do a deep dive into this problem for about 6 to 8 months between my deployments. And what I found was it's just continuing to grow. And so I asked all these questions to law enforcement and other agencies, and they said the problem is so big we don't have the manpower and budgets to keep up. And that goes for everything you guys said, from recovery to identification, technology, we'll talk about here in a second, operations. So we were formed with the model. We have 3 sections in the organization. We have a section where we partner with shelters and recovery organizations. So we have a conduit. When we get a victim, we just connect them with the people that are experts in the healing process. We have a training and awareness piece, which Brenda Lutz is a big part. You call Brenda, she's there, and we have several volunteers. We speak to anybody, any group, any organization. The third piece, which is probably the most common and complex piece of what we do, is our operations. Inside of our operations, we can conduct surveillance and investigations on information we receive about human trafficking or child exploitation. Inside of that as well, we have cyber analysts who are trained in several different disciplines on tracking, identification, indexing information. So that's kind of the 30,000-foot view of what we do. I think what we'll talk about is I got asked to talk about the cyber and the technology piece. And I think that we'll talk only about 3. I mean, we could talk 2 days probably on cybersecurity and cyber issues. The big elephant out there is obviously social media, right? And what is social media? It's exactly what it says. It's a connector. It was developed to connect friends, family. The world has gotten faster. Everybody lives all over the world. Everybody can communicate real time. I mean, it's a great technology. The internet is fantastic. But what has occurred when the internet has been continually updated and built, you know, for the last 20 years, it has basically built a technology of infrastructure for the criminal activities that go on, not besides trafficking, as well as weapons, guns, drugs, any other type of nefarious crime that can be committed for profit. So basically, this business model was created, and all of these criminals and traffickers who chose to do this, they're just exploiting it. So that's why, and some of the points you guys have both brought out already, is let's talk about the children right now. kids 10, 12, 13-year-olds, they all got phones. We've had their parents in our office that have found, they've taken screenshots of you name the apps, we probably can give you 50 of where these kids are communicating with strangers. And some of them are legitimate. You know, a lot of the apps are legitimate, but what has occurred is these traffickers and predators have exploited this technology, and they have exactly done that. They have set up profiles where they either pretend to be someone in high school or younger, college. I had a case yesterday where the guy just come right out and said he was 35 years old talking to a 14-year-old. They don't even hide it anymore. So this technology is just why I think has fueled this problem over the past 5 years and maybe longer. So how do we control it as parents and maybe as aunts and uncles? One of the things the traffickers do is they'll start really innocuous conversations with kids, and they try to find out what's vulnerable. And I think Brenda mentioned it. It's called grooming. They'll befriend them for 3, 4, 5 months till there's a trust factor there, and then they pop the question. Hey, how about we meet, or how about we share some pictures? Hey, some of the language might get a little bit more sexual, and they really know how to manipulate these people. What they do is they'll identify vulnerabilities in these kids, and then they leverage it. And these traffickers and predators are the masters at manipulation. It's their bread and butter, and they practice it, and they really have honed a skill to identify vulnerable people, and not only kids, adults for sure as well. Whether it's a dysfunctional family, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's drug or alcohol addiction, whether it's a bully situation where they're not being, fitting in with the group, so they're looking for attention. We've seen interviews where, I say this loosely, reformed traffickers will say, with a 30-second to 1-minute conversation of a teen in a mall, they can almost tell if this is a person they want to pursue because of their demeanor and how they present themselves. So we have this huge social media platform out there, and how do we protect our kids for it? The first thing is the parents or the guardians are going to have to be involved in their child's social media. We've actually given briefs over the past 3 years. We probably spoke to over 3,000 sets of people. We've actually had parents feel guilty doing that. They said, we feel like we're hovering over our kids, that there's no trust factor there. And I can only say, the world we grew up in is not the world of today. I said, you're going to have to overcome this trusting that that's the way you prove to your children you trust them. You're going to have to get involved. You're going to have to speak to them, the ones that'll listen, and really have a heart-to-heart about what's going on, what the facts are. And this is out of love and protection. This isn't out of an untrust vein that we're speaking about this. But I can tell you, most of them leave our presentations, and I would say probably 10% are actually going to have that hard conversation until they do keep an eye on their phones. They try to monitor their social media, and then they come in with screenshots and a whole list of a conversation that somebody had with their 13-year-old daughter that was this close to meeting them for $90. They were going to meet him at a restaurant up in Elwood City. So, and it's just endless of these cases that we get called on. So the social media piece, they're really going to have to be involved in that, and they're going to have to make some serious decisions on the parental controls on the device. I think somebody brought it up when they go to bed. Don't let them take it to bed. I think Brenda, I'm getting our thing confused from this morning, but made a good point. A lot of them, they take it to bed to listen to their music, and I get it. But Brenda, like she said, you just opened their bedroom to every predator that's online hacking into these apps and using them for grooming and trying to set up these relationships with these kids. So social media is a very dangerous thing, but it's just going to have to be monitored. One other point I'll make about these apps, if you're going to have your kids use them, and I got 6 grandkids, one on the way, and most of them are boys, so they're all into the karate games and things and football. You got to watch where you load these apps. These apps sometimes are developed in other countries, and as soon as you load that app on a device, it's taking your information. It'll take your IP address. If you have any type of personal information on that phone, like if you borrow your mom or dad's phone, the kids, any banking information they have on there, they have access now to the phone. That's not necessarily saying they have full access to everything that's protected in there, but that's the first step. And then there's a lot of expertise involved, depending on if they're just trying to get banking or if they're trying to groom your kids, that they can use to start gathering personal information against everything on there. I'll use Facebook for an example, moving off the apps of the phone from the children. With Facebook, which kind of now is for old people, there's other things, but as they gain their friends, it's just really, if you look at it, it's like a communication network that we would set up. Joe has 5 friends. Those 5 friends have 10 each. Those 10 have 20. Within days, you can have hundreds of thousands of people connected through that social media or application that now have access to go on and kind of start gathering information off you. And I can give you some examples later offline, but Google your name. And then there's some other things you can go on to actually see what information Google, LinkedIn, a couple other, even the adult platforms that are out there for professionals. LinkedIn's information is scrubbed daily. They pull all your personal information, they marry it up with other things, they sell it. Sometimes industries, they're hacked, so they have your personal information. Your name, date of birth, social security number, some people still put that out there. High school you went to. Once you have a few pieces, they're just putting the puzzle pieces together to get into your system, and then they have personal and private information. Now, the reason I bring that up is if it's somebody that, say, it doesn't want people to know maybe a medical history or maybe a criminal history or even civil, they can leverage that to groom your children. We've seen it. I just came back Sunday from a state in the South where a 15-year-old was trafficked by her parents. It's in litigation. I mean, she's in foster care now. We're seeing what's going to happen there. I mean, I got that call Thursday night and I had to get down there because the folks just didn't know what to do. That's more and more common. The problem is intergenerational, and they're using the technology to run their business, to communicate, to transfer money. Cryptocurrencies become a big part of it. So for security wise, I would offer, there's things online you can look at. Changing your passport every 30 days. It's what we do at work, right? I mean, it's a pain. I got a password book that it's really difficult sometimes. It's like you're constantly changing passwords. But there's also technology that we even use in our organization. One is LastPass. You can put all your passwords in there. Now there's a master password that gets in it. So you're going to have to take precautions where you save that password. But that will lock all your passwords to all your devices, your kids' devices. And it really helps for people if they get your information off of Google or Gmail, any other type of search engine that can be out there that's scraping this information. Dating apps, the worst. When you fill out forms for dating apps, sometimes you have young kids that want to leave home, they're runaways. I think the statistic right now is 1 out of 4 that is trafficked from a runaway. They fill out the dating apps, they lie about their ages. Next thing you know, you have predators on there trying to, I mean, that's what it's there for, to connect up, get together. And it can even be adults. There's predators out there that are grooming 18, 20, 21-year-olds. They're looking for vulnerability. And there was a woman up in Oregon that had a baby the summer before she went to college. Met a guy. She ended up not going to college. She had the baby, and he leveraged her with the baby. She was trafficked for 7 years. He said, "If you don't do what I tell you, I got a lot of money in you." He says, "I'm going to put your child out in the street." So these people will stop at nothing for leverage and to make their profit. I mean, it's an unbelievable evil, I think, that's in our society that has gone unchecked for so many years. I'm just looking, we talked about, we knew some people in high school being groomed. Their parents had no idea. In the evenings, they were going out with friends. They were being trafficked, brought home at night. Parents never had a clue. And you know, it is different across the board. Both parents are working. There's a lot more stress, I think, especially lately with COVID, financial stress. Sometimes the kids, it's much easier, you know, in a day to go out and throw a football. Today, they're on their phones playing games or on their iPads playing games. So you can focus on how you're going to pay the mortgage. So there's a lot of matrices that are causing this, but the technology piece is certainly one of the main ways they communicate, they traffic, they pay, and they move them. Transportation routes are set up, geospatial programs, how to move them across country. They know where certain special events will be. They bring people in because there's going to be a lot of money to be made there. And this is all done through technology. And I don't want to take up too much more of my 15. And even when they post photos, you know, the kids are posting photos online. If they post the original photo, there's a pixel in there where the location can be identified. So that you can take the photo and you can put it in a program, and I can tell you what day, time, and place that photo was taken. So, I mean, if you're going to do that, you know, sometimes we tell them to do a screenshot, save it, then post it. It kind of removes the technology where you can do the identification. But once again, there's other problems with kids posting some things like that. Last point I'll make, and I'm sure we'll have some questions, disinformation. We have a lot of volunteers at the Asservo Project, and we meet with them. They go through just really a half a day. We talk about what we do, what we don't do. And and I see other people on Facebook and some other platforms doing it, Instagram. They see something, they share it. There is absolutely no diligence if the information is correct. But it looks good, right? 100 people arrested today. I mean, disinformation is just as harmful to the problem. Because what happens when disinformation, I got 100 people filling my inbox saying, did you see this? Yeah, it's not true. It's not true. This much of it was true. But, you know, it's the old one, it gets passed down the line to the end of the classroom. And the next thing you know, the story is just so conflated and it's not correct. So I would caution folks on just arbitrarily sharing information without doing some research on it, because it can contribute from the standpoint of it ties up our resources and law enforcement's, because we partner with law enforcement on everything we do. It ties up assets that could be going after actual trafficking situations or child predators instead of following down this lead that ends up being just embellished. So thank you. And I think we'll end with that before I go.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone. It was very informational, and sometimes we definitely pass by that information, not paying attention. And I just wanted to mention that I've done some research, and I've seen that PA not in 10 top states of human trafficking, but it doesn't mean what I always keep saying, that do not look at the statistics, because if 1 case, 2 cases, 3 cases occur in the state, it's already pandemic, right? So that's why if you have any questions, please, to any of our panelists or any remarks, put it on chat or just unmute yourself and ask away in physical presence. So any questions or to any of our brilliant speakers. So do not be shy. I know it's a very huge problem, but let's discuss that. So any question, you can raise your hand if you have in the participants button. I'm gonna try to look up for that.
Joe, you made me Google myself as you were talking. I was like, haven't done that in a while. It's crazy. I'm like, okay. Even the Google image searches, I'm like there. So y'all should do that. There's your little homework assignment. See what you can see of yourself on Google.
That's a question, I guess. So please ask away. There is first, you're here listed as LG Style 5. I do not know your name, so please ask away.
Yes, hi, my name is Barbara. I've got a question. Could I get some contact information for, I believe her name was Brenda, the first gal that was talking about the foster kids missing. Was it Brenda that was talking about?
Yes, a little bit. I talked about the fact that we've got so many kids missing out of foster care.
Right.
And, you know, we just can't get a handle on the actual numbers. Not that I have heard anyway.
Okay. Is there some, who are you connected with? I didn't catch that. I got on just a little bit late there. What organization are you with?
Oh, so I'm a volunteer ambassador of hope through Shared Hope International, and I also am a part of the awareness and prevention team for Living in Liberty. So Living in Liberty is the local Pittsburgh organization, and then Shared Hope International is, you know, the international as well as in the United States.
Okay. Okay, great. I'm going to look at those sites a little bit more. Foster kids adoption is one of the areas that I've worked for a long time, and I've done a lot of sex trafficking education and stuff too. But I'm finding more with these foster kids, all the, what do you say, all the horrible stuff that's happening, and nobody knows what's going on, where these kids are and everything. And so it's just an area I want to look into more. And so when you brought that up, it was like, oh, who is this talking about? I just wanted to make sure I had some information about these organizations. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I didn't catch all that. Did anybody else?
You have, yes, something with the, it was a remark, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Brenda. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Best way to find me, contact me is probably just via Facebook. And send me a message.
Oh, sorry, it's just like something with that. Okay, thank you, Barbara. So we have two questions in the chat. So Bailey is asking, why is there such a surge in human trafficking? Any of you would like to address?
Yeah, I don't think there's been a surge of it. I just think there's more awareness about it.
Mm-hmm.
There certainly hasn't been a surge. This has been going on for hundreds of years, hundreds. And now with technology, business is much easier to perform, faster, more efficient. And with the problems we have, I think just in society in itself, there are more vulnerable people out there. So I don't believe it's been a surge recently. I think it's been on the rise because of technology, but I think it's just been around. And maybe it is an uptick because it has been steady for years. I think the overwhelming optic of it surging is more awareness and more people are starting to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And also law enforcement just got some money this year.
Yeah.
They got a pretty nice package. So law enforcement agencies now, and it doesn't last all year. It's a short time where they do these task force stings, and it'll continue. But now they have some resources where they've really beefed them up to go after them for a couple of weeks, mm-hmm. if not months.
I think with that awareness that Joe's talking about, it also has, like, identification of victims has gotten better. So, like, we might see more numbers of people that is happening right now, but that's because we've gotten better at actually identifying them. For a long time, a lot of victims were treated as even like illegally prostituting and like ending up in jail type thing. But now we're actually able to identify victims as trafficking and have that knowledge, as opposed to like lump summing everybody together and never actually getting the help they need, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. Brenda, will you like?
Another quick thing too, because of the internet, because of the connection and what they can do, they literally can, Joe talked about them, you know, they'd exchange a picture. It's called sextortion. So once that trafficker friends that kid and gets one picture, they just keep extorting them for more and more and more. And then they can continually sell it. So literally they're trafficking the kids right out of their own home with never leaving their home. They've set up kind of pay-per-view areas too, where you can just say, hey, I'll pay this much. I want to see this happen to this kid, or I want to see this sex act. And then they sell it so you can buy to watch these things. So these kids are, you know, right out of their own home. So you don't, a lot of times when we hear trafficking, we think of moving from one spot to another, and that absolutely can happen, but not all the time.
Thank you. Another question we have from Hannah. What can college students, especially those who are in financial hardship and cannot necessarily donate to organization, to respond to the human trafficking crisis?
That's a great question, Hannah. I was definitely in that shoes when I was in college because life is expensive. And I definitely, Really, you're doing one of the best things that you could possibly do right now, and that's sitting in this and learning more about it. Even just to continue educating yourself, it's not always like the most upbeat conversations with friends and family, but being able to have these discussions when that comes around. And I mean, even using your own social media, and even, you know, sometimes trying to pull people aside. Joe was talking about all the misinformation that gets shared around. I think that's one of the biggest things we can all be doing right now that is going to help the crisis and the news that comes out, is, you know, kind of calling out misinformation for what it is, and misinformation, and then, you know, making sure true and factual information is getting out, which is why we're all here.
Yes, and if you have trouble knowing what that is, contact one of us. I know I do. I bounce to Joe quite a bit, and I'll say, is there any validity to this? Because they've got the technology a lot more than, you know, than I do. But ask questions and dig into it. Keep learning. Keep being a voice.
There's so many books and documentaries, not to like choose sides or anything, but a really good documentary that literally goes through the grooming process well is truly the Jeffrey Epstein, The Filthy Rich series. There's, I think it's episode 2 or 3, where they're talking about this process, and they never actually call it grooming, but I'm like sitting there watching it and I'm like, this is textbook. So there's all sorts of like documentaries on Netflix, like stuff that, like, you know, share your subscription with your roommates, whatever, to continue like educating yourself while you're in college.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to speak against Netflix for a minute, because they just came out with the show Cuties, or the movie Cuties. If you have Netflix, cancel it. Sorry. That's my opinion.
Okay. Any other questions, remarks, please ask away. Because I have, but I reserve those questions to be able to give it to you. So any questions so far you have as well? Because it's definitely a very huge topic, and we could talk about that years, I guess, and do not have the answer to all the questions. But I agree that you can look up for the local organizations if you have spotted something, some signs, if you would like to address, because sometimes we definitely do not know how to identify and determine the problem. So I have there is a Noah. What is the best preventative measure to human trafficking?
Education. That's the start of it. Education. Know what it looks like. Be wise about it. Speak out about it. Stand up against it. When you know, yeah, education is where the start is.
Okay. In a perfect world, like Brenda had said, we'd have no, you know, supply and demand thing, but because that's what it is. I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, the most thing would be it didn't exist, but we're here.
Okay. Thank you, Noah, for the question. We have another one from Nikki. Is it true that traffickers are putting items on cars to lure people in, like zip ties and things like that?
We haven't seen it. I've seen it on social media several times. It's not to say maybe there was an isolated incident somewhere. Like Brenda mentioned, it's usually not that. It's usually not the snatch and grab. It happens more overseas, maybe, in some countries, but it's the relationship. It's the intergenerational connection. They know they're traffickers. They're vulnerable for some reason. They don't have to snatch and grab anymore. You know, there's other processes and technology and procedures and, you know, other controlling factors that they can integrate into somebody's life to do it. That's one of those things I'm like, I shrug my shoulders, like maybe. I mean, trafficking or not, if I come up and I have 3 daughters and they've been raised not to be a victim, trust me, I feel bad for the person that's going to try to snatch one of them. And if they walk up to their car and they see these things wire-tied, that's just a problem in itself, right? I mean, is it trafficking, or is it just somebody wanting to steal their car or rob them? Who knows, right? So that's why I say about the information, hey, that's an unusual anomaly for sure, okay? If you see that on your car, keep walking. Keep walking, get on your phone, call the police. Don't go to your car. Keep pushing your cart. I don't care if you push it around a lot and back into the store. You have to be prepared not to be a victim. You have to be aware. You have to know your surroundings. You have to teach. And I'm not saying everybody's got to be a spy or everybody's got to be this tactical operator. You just really notice things in the world. You notice what looks right and what doesn't. If something doesn't look right, follow your gut. Because if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't.
Thank you, thank you. So Macy is asking, Brenda mentioned earlier something about the change from 1 million to 45 million. You missed that. So yes, it's about imagery, right? In the
child sexual abuse imagery online. That came from the New York Times report. So in 4 years, it went from 1 million all the way up to 45 million that were found online. In part, that is because we're doing better investigating and police action and finding out what's going on. But the fact is, it's skyrocketed in that area because it's so easy to transfer all these images now that it's not a problem. And incidentally, I just heard last night or night before on the news that there was a big bust in Center Township. Woohoo! And they got 16 traffickers. And that's something I've been speaking out for some time, because when I started learning about how this works, I thought, well, it always goes up at big sporting events and things like that. And I thought, man, in my area, I'm in Beaver County, and we have the processing plant being built. There's 6,000 jobs down there, most of them transient, most of them men. And I know in our area, you can't drive anywhere in a 5-mile radius without hitting a gas well. I mean, all that's great for our economy, but I knew it had to be spiking, the human trafficking. Last year I spoke to a woman in the state of Pennsylvania on human trafficking, and I had mentioned about these gas wells, and she said to me, oh my gosh, I just was talking the other day with somebody from Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, which is up where the Grand Canyon of PA is. It's a gorgeous little tiny Norman Rockwell town. She said they're completely overrun. They're bringing in, limousine fulls of prostitutes to service the men that are in the area. And so, they don't even know what to do with all of them, because it's a little tiny town with a little tiny police force. So these things are definitely, look, they're in our backyard. They truly are. We just need to open our eyes to them.
Thank you. Any other questions? And before we wrap up, because there is definitely different layers, and what I would like to reiterate, so we have to always kind of separate things, right? When we are talking about human trafficking, it's involuntary, then people forced to. Aside of sex work, when sex work sometimes is voluntary and people go, and there's two different layers, but they're interconnected as far as I'm concerned. And one question I would like to ask all of you, because we're talking mostly about minors, right, who forced to the slavery, forced to the human trafficking. Does that human trafficking on minors fall under the category of pedophilia, or there is a special legislation in the United States which prosecute people who are trafficking the minors? So it's a set of different legislations.
It's funny you brought that up. We're also working with a couple of Superior Court judges here in Pennsylvania talking about legislative action against minors. The problem is, state to state, it differs. Some states, they can consent at 16. Some states, I don't know if it's as low as 14. I know there are some that are 15. So the problem comes into what state, what's the age, what's the circumstances. But if they are a minor, even if they can't give consent, like Brenda pointed out, if they can be forced or coerced, whether it's a meal or a place to live or money. There are separate sections for trafficking a minor. I don't believe there's any statutes that identified as pedophilia. Pedophilia is a ideology and a term about people who, like children in sexually, I guess, in abusive ways as well. So, talking about the other things, how to help besides education, is start getting on your state senators and representatives, because that's where it's going to start. The federal government will catch up, but when it comes down to it, it's going to be to the state courts, and the punishment is not near enough. These people are getting back out. The recidivism rate is huge, and some of these predators will even tell you, they're like, I can't stop this. It's like an addiction. So, it varies, but I think it's getting better in some places. Some places it's still being ignored. But there are certain statutes and specific crimes that they can be charged with when they're under 18. Unfortunately, it's a case by case.
Mm-hmm.
Another big issue that we see in it is when you have a minor that is rescued out of human trafficking is where do they go? What happens? As far as I know, there is one home in the United States for a boy that's rescued out of human trafficking. There are more for girls, but very few. Even the Living in Liberty, the ones we work with, you have to be over 18 years old. So when it's a minor, most of the time, they just get recycled back through the system. It is incredibly sad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have judges too that you've got to watch, because you have judges that vote for like families. They're all for families. And so that sounds really good. But I know there's been cases where they know the child was trafficked by a family member and they're put back into the family. Mm-hmm. Some of it just blows your mind what happens, but who we vote for and our voice, the voice that we have, and as well as the voice we have and the money that we spend and where we choose to put our resources is, you know, we have more power than we give ourselves credit for.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So any other last remarks, questions you would like to, okay, Maisie. So Maisie is asking, what do you do if you think a business or situation looks sketchy, but you are just not sure?
Reach out to us. We get them all the time.
Yeah, don't go into it. If you think it's sketchy,
Yeah.
like what Joe said, trust your gut. Don't go running into the place. But yeah, reach out. Even like law enforcement. There's the National Human Trafficking Tip Line, which I used to have memorized. It's like a bunch of 8s. It's so easy to memorize. It's like 888. But they're always taking tips, and then it gets investigated if it's picked up. So yeah, I would always just call. Don't try to like be the hero in the situations. Like call people to look into it. Yeah.
Put this number in your phone now. It is 1-888-373-7888. It is the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. Call them. Even if you're not sure, as Kaeleen said, like that gut feeling, and I tell all the kids that I talk to, you know, God gave you that feeling for a reason, and you're going to be in a situation, it's going to happen quick, and you're going to think, what was that? I'm not, like, something wasn't right. Make the call. It's a phone call. Make the call. It's 1-888-373-7888.
Is it 20?
It is.
Yes, and you can do it anonymously, but, you know, make the call. And as always, the Asservo Project, man, they're phenomenal with stuff like that. So call 911. If you think it's an emergency situation, you're not sure, call 911. I've worked with different law enforcement officers and police officers, and they're like, you guys, you're the citizens, you're the eyes and the ears in our community. You know, we need to know, we need that help. Mm-hmm. So, you know, call 911, let them know.
Thank you.
If I could tag on that, Brenda, too, we're having a tip line coming out next week it's just another resource in addition to the national hotline. We are a global organization. We work anywhere in the world, but you know, if you don't get a response because they're busy as well, send it to us. Mm-hmm. I mean, any local organization too, double up on the outreach, right? Send it to everybody because things fall through the cracks. Nobody's perfect. Excellent point not to go in or to approach a trafficker. And one other thing, this is for you, Kaeleen, and the rest of you, go to the site, I've Been Pawned, PWND. Put your email information in there, and you might want to be sitting down to see who's already in your stuff.
Okay, thank you very much. So basically what we've been doing here already, educating ourselves, getting information, get the resources. We're going to share with the community, with the campus, the contact information for the Voice, the Asservo Project, and the Living in Liberty, and share it. So please, if you have any other questions further, we can bring our speakers back if you have some additional topics you would like to reiterate on that. But it was great. Thank you very much for your contribution and for being with us in this night. I know it's hectic and crazy around the world, but we have to stay on top of things. So I appreciate that.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on a Wednesday
Thank
of all
you.
days. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day and the week.
God bless.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
God bless everybody.
Thanks,
Stay safe.
everybody.
Bye-bye.